Hi, and welcome to another edition of the Trustcast Show. We're happy to have with us today Jenet Pequeno. Did I get that completely right?
You did. You did. Thank you for that.
Yes. Okay, good. I thought I would screw that up, but I got it right out of the box. Okay. So Jenet grew up in a single parent household in the Chicago suburbs, became an Illinois super lawyer in family law, and now leads a six-attorney firm that fights for parents and children in the moments that matter most. Janae, you said that your own childhood in a non-traditional family is what drives every case you take. Tell me about one moment growing up where you said, "This is exactly why I'm going to do this work."
It's funny where my mom, single mom, would have to choose between putting gas in the car, $5 of gas so she can get to work and come back home, or buying groceries like a loaf of bread, eggs, and milk, which was the staples in our home. And so she would have to really manage her money, and that stuck with me. Also, her putting sometimes $2 or $3 of gas back when it was 99 cents a gallon. That was a while ago. But, her having to choose between gassing up her car or feeding her children. And so, helping single moms, that's something that we do allow discounted rates in our law firm for single moms. And we also, just seek to create justice and equality so that children don't go without. And so, children are really the primary reason, and to support them and to care for them in the system that sometimes leaves them as collateral damage in a divorce and family law case.
So you've been licensed since 2004. Did you go straight into family law or how'd you end up there?
So I worked in the suburbs of Chicago. It was Woodstock, Illinois, and I just took whatever job I could. I went to law school in Miami, and I did not have any connections to network. I really didn't even know what networking was when I first graduated, but I didn't have that network that would allow me to get into multiple interviews and look for that. So I took the first interview that I could get, and I took the first job I could get, and that led me to a small boutique in Woodstock. And I did work with a lot of the Spanish speakers, and so I did a lot of traffic, real estate, and then some family law in that boutique. And I really enjoyed helping people on that very personal basis of family law where their money, their children, and their retirement are at stake.
So I'm going to pose some questions like I'm a potential client. So someone just found out their spouse filed for divorce. What's the very first thing they need to do?
They found out their spouse filed, they need to look at their bank accounts and make sure that none of the money's been moved around or there's nothing missing. I would say, taking copies. Um, some spouses will either lock away all the financial information, whether it be retirement accounts, the IRAs, traditional Roths, 401ks. Um, we've seen sometimes that some spouses will actually move money out of those accounts without their spouse knowing. Sometimes spouses will even forge a signature if that's required for them to get that money out. So, just really have to protect yourself. Probably run a credit report on yourself and your spouse. Maybe they're taking out debt in your name, credit cards that you don't even know exist. And then also with housing, sometimes there can be home equity lines of credit issued. Um, and I believe they need both signatures from the spouses on there, but sometimes the spouse may, forge that, especially with electronic signatures now. They put down a separate email and then they can have it signed in a matter of seconds once they get that email.
So these all sound like horrible situations. So let's say that a spouse does, you know, before they're, when they say they're thinking to themselves, I'm just thinking it out loud. I'm done with this relationship. I want to get a divorce, but I want to make sure I'm going to move all the money around and just to leave a little bit in that account. So she doesn't know or he doesn't know, and I'm going to do all these things in advance, and then I'm going to splash them with the legal papers. Is that a scenario that you've seen more than once?
More than once, probably several, multiple times a year. And it's very unfortunate. But the person who actually files for divorce, they've been planning this and thinking about it and ruminating about it in their head for months before they actually maybe even go talk to a lawyer. We've I've heard some horror stories of different attorneys who have maybe coached and counseled their clients to do certain things that way, to move some things around. Um, and then one recent scam that we've seen is that people start to move property that was of the marriage in both parties' names, and they might give it to a family member and then maybe move that into a trust from the family member. So it's multiple layers of complexity to try and get that back into the marriage. We're fighting one like that right now, and we're about halfway through, but we're trying to move it back from the son's trust. We had to sue the son, who's an adult, and bring him into the case. And we're trying to recapture some of that trust property and put it back into the marriage because it was wrongfully put outside of the marriage. And that's a multiple $100,000 question that we're fighting right now.
Yeah, so if let's say if I don't know whether this happens for the man or the woman, it's probably equally both. Um I'm but let's say the person who is, you know, the all the money's been taken out and the other person finds out, hey, you're filed for a divorce, but then they're depending on that money. What can they do? Because you may have, they may have car payments and rent and all this, and the other person just moves out, and they take all the finances with them, and I mean, virtually they could be destitute. Is that not right?
It could happen without a plan, but one of the first things you need to do in your divorce is work with the lawyer, get a good plan together, and then go out about executing that plan. So if there's with the financial malfeasance that we're talking about, the court will probably work on an emergency basis for something to right that wrong. So we have to get in court right away. We have to tell the judge about what this party did and where the money's at before it gets all spent, and to bring that money back into these accounts, and possibly even freeze accounts where we would have to send one of the court orders to the bank and have them see that this bank is now, this account's frozen, kind of like an IRS lien or a collections lien.
Mhm.
Freeze that account. So it may take, you know, several days. It may take a week to get into court, depending on the court's availability. But once you get in front of a judge and they hear this story, they've seen this before, and we just need to act promptly on it and preserve these assets of the estate.
So in this particular scenario, because I'm going to go down this rat hole, in this particular scenario, does that not put the person who committed this, which is actually a crime, I'm sure. I don't know. Is it a crime?
No, if they're married, it's not, because both parties are entitled to assets.
Okay.
They're joint marital assets. So it's not a crime. You're not, taking anybody's property that doesn't belong to you. It's a shared property, but it does look
Hmm.
horrible for the person who's doing it, and it could taint the way the court looks at that person for the rest of the case.
That was my question. Does this taint that the individual who does who's, I'm going to call him a perp, even though he's not, or
Yeah.
she, just because that's that's
Yeah,
probably
no,
a good definition of what they did,
yeah, it does.
but it does taint.
It absolutely can. It can be brought up again and again. Well, judge, they did that then. Well, what about now? We need to move this one forward. Or if there's a 50-50 call, maybe the judge will say, all right, well, I'm going to go with the person who was innocent at the beginning of this. And, as they say in the NFL, a tie goes to the receiver. A tie typically goes to the person who did not do the wrongdoing.
Hmm. So how long is an Illinois divorce actually going to take if kids are involved?
kids are involved, there's a Supreme Court rule 922 that talks about 18 months from the date of the action being commenced. So when I was a much younger attorney, when I started out 22 years ago, and I had hair and about 15 pounds lighter, um, I saw some of the cases that are like 5 years old, 6 years old, and they, some of these kids were aging out of even just being a minor. And so sometime, maybe 5 years after that, somewhere in the early 2000s, the Illinois Supreme Court said, that's not serving children. Attorneys, clean your act up, get your act together. You need to have a judgment done or a trial date within 18 months of a case being filed. And so I really agree with that sentiment because these children of divorce do not have to be the rope in a tug of war for more than 18 months. Sometimes there will be post decree actions and motions they file after a case is done, which kind of makes them still the rope in the tug of war. But at least for the finality of the initial case, they want that to be done in 18 months. Except for good cause shown, sometimes maybe there's a psychological report that's still being prepared, and so the judge will give that psychologist time to get the report together and finished. But, it's not like it used to be, and I think that's a better change for the betterment of these children. Regarding no kids involved, Illinois Supreme Court still came out with, an order in 2022 in March, and it says that I wanna say maybe 95% of the cases are done within, you know, a year, and maybe 98% of the cases are done in 15 years. That's the proposed kind of, timeline. It's not hard and fast, but it's a proposed timeline by the Illinois Supreme Court when there are no children, and then they say maybe only 2% go beyond that 15-month, in extraordinary circumstances. So we have seen cases go beyond the 15 months. We've seen some cases go sometimes 2 years before they even issue a trial date. But those cases, you
Wow.
really have to have a synergy with your client. You have to have a good relationship because, you guys are walking down this, you know, desert together with landmines left and right, and you're just trying to come out in one piece across the finish line.
What if both parties are in agreement as to what should happen? Which I don't know how often that happens, but do you still need a lawyer?
So great question, Zane. Um, I think that even if people don't have any real disputes of the stress of having to get these papers right, I don't know how long it's been since people been to school and had homework assignments, but these are homework assignments you have to get correct. Because the judge, I've seen it so many times where a judge will say, "Sir, ma'am, I see this and I see that you want to be finished, but it's not in the proper form. Come back." And so some people are taking off of work, and they have to just come back. Some of our clients have come to us and they say, we've been turned away from the court numerous times. We're tired of it. Well, I'm tired of it. We just represent one person in the divorce. And, they want it done and we get it done right the first time. And so we put in the proper form, their agreement, and those cases can wrap up in 4, 6, 8 weeks. But really, um, I have a saying. My team knows I have a bunch of sayings, but this one is the law is easy, people are hard. So, if we get the signatures on there, um, by agreement, voluntarily, we could be done in 4 to 6 weeks. But sometimes even just with some boilerplate language in court paperwork, um, some people will refuse to sign because boilerplate, saying that irreconcilable differences caused the breakdown of the marriage. And some people don't want to sign. They're like, well, he cheated, and I don't agree with that. But I want the divorce, but the judge needs to know that they're agree to irreconcilable differences breaking down the marriage. So, um, So some people they do struggle with language and accepting of the language that goes into most of our agreements, but it's rare. But once we explain that to them and educate them some more, then they usually end up signing, and we go to court and they say, "Yes, I want to be divorced. I understand what I signed." Because the court needs to know that they agree. Nobody's being
So
forced.
Illinois,
Yeah, go ahead.
so Illinois doesn't call it custody anymore. It's allocation of parental responsibilities. What does that actually mean for a parent who's afraid of losing time with their kids?
So the allocation of parental responsibilities is decision making on one angle, and the second angle is parenting time. So I call it in our office primary residency. So who's going to be the primary custodial parent? And they thought that visitation sounded more like a jail, and they wanted to get rid of that type of vernacular from the system. So a parent who's afraid of losing time, it really depends. What I tell people who are still living in the same house together, don't leave until you have a parenting schedule in place, because it's easier, even if you're the dad, to go from, 100% of the overnights that are shared down to 50 or 60 or 40% of the overnights, 35% of the overnights, than it is to walk away, get your new apartment, um, and then start from 0 to try and get to 50. It's just a higher, it's easier to step down than it is to lift the weight. It's easier to put the weight down. And so in court, when you're in court, I would recommend, because I've seen a lot, until it's signed and sealed by a judge, whatever your schedule is that you want, stay in the house until you can get a schedule that both parties can live with. So, because if not, then whoever left the house and left the child and left other parent with them, that person really controls all the parenting time in reality. It shouldn't be that way, but that's how it works out.
So if both my spouse and I want to be the primary parent, what does an Illinois judge look at, to make that decision?
They have the best interest standards, which, are found in the code in the IMDMA. There's 17 factors. Um, some of them are the ability of a parent to support the relationship of the other parent. That's one of the biggest ones, because I don't know if you've heard of alienation, but sometimes
Sure.
alienating parent might want to prevent the other parent from seeing the child or talking negatively about the other parent to the children. And so, that's a big factor. Parents don't get, just one strike and you're out. They get a lot of chances to clear up the allegations of alienation. And so, they can, be told like you have to allow the parenting time to happen. Or sometimes, an alienating parent might place the child in activities when it's the other parent's parenting time. Like, well, I got to put him in soccer or dance. And don't you think it's important that the child go to soccer or dance, whatever it is? And so we've seen a lot of gamesmanship over the years. Um, we've seen parents call the other parents names, pejoratives to the children, and that doesn't support a relationship with the other parent. Um, if one of the parties is a sex offender is also one of the factors. So that's happened, and those parents usually don't get any parenting time either. But the other things I would say non-statutory are just education and socialization. Those are two primary drivers where if one parent is really trying to provide the best education for this child or these children, and also trying to socialize them and doing the play dates and doing the activities, and maybe getting them some extra help, some Kumon or some of these private tutorings, then that parent usually has some kind of an advantage in an Illinois family court. The best interest standards still hold.
So a lot of dads,
Go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, I don't want to interrupt something you're going to tell me interesting and still holds. go ahead and you can finish that thought.
Yeah, the best interests still hold, and those factors are all over Google, and some of our clients bring that to us, sometimes as if we don't know them. But the best interest standards, if you can look at your life and just kind of place yourself and the other parent within those factors, those 17 factors, the child's adjustment to the community and the school, you can see. Yeah, I just had a consultation last week where the mother wanted to move to, maybe 25 miles away. And I was like, that's a bad idea. You don't have an agreement right now. School's going to be an issue. She wanted to move to a house she could afford. And, um, the schools in that area were not the greatest compared to where, the dual income school district could provide. So, and there's a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old. So the children were older. So it was a bit more,
Hmm.
pertinent to this family, the school district, because courts also like kids to finish out high school, at least for the halfway through with it. So, the best interests do hold, but there's so many other things the judge can take into consideration.
So historically, moms have always had an advantage going into these situations. Is that still true to some degree?
I believe it is. I think the statute is fair. I think the application of the statute is not always. And when
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
was a young attorney, 22 years ago, mothers would win sole custody like 99% of the time. They could just sit there on their
Hmm.
hands, not communicate, not participate in co-parenting for the betterment of the children, and they would get sole custody. Well, counsel, they can't agree. Clearly, they can't communicate. They can't agree, so we're going to give sole custody to mom. And back then, 22 years ago, Zane, the majority, I worked all over the counties of northern Illinois, Chicagoland, and dads would get Wednesday for dinner, Friday at 5 to Sunday at 5. Sometimes I was like, why are these guys even hiring attorneys? Like if that's the way it's going to be.
Hmm.
And so it has changed. Um, it has changed, but there are still some segment of the legal population that has a gender bias, and I believe that exists. I've seen it.
Right.
I've seen it in play as recently as a couple
Yeah.
years ago, and I'm also a guardian at Litem, Zane, and so I'm appointed in Kane County where mom and dad have real heavy argument, bitter battles on custody disputes. We're moving to Texas or whatever. And the way I like to do it, I like to be kid centric. That goes back to wanting the best for these children over and my history as a child, um, of underprivileged is what I would say. And, I probably given dad's residency a third of the time, mom's residency a third of the time, and 50-50 parenting a third of the time. So within, Illinois statutes, you have to look at 2 years of what these parties have been doing for the filing of the action. And so, if these parties have been separated for a period, I look at that and I weigh that very heavily. If it's not broken, don't fix it. I've heard some judges say that verbatim. And so, if this is what they were able to do, but then I've seen some moms very, I would say, confident, maybe overconfident, that they can just tell me that they want, we were doing 50-50 when we split up, but now I want 75 and the dad can get 25%. And I'm like, wait, stop,
Yeah.
hold up. Like these children have grown accustomed to this lifestyle with both of you. They love you, they love him. Why should I change that? Just because you want it? Give me a reason. And so that's a shock to a lot of moms when I tell them that. But I don't want them to be confused at where I'm coming from. When I was a young attorney, the some of the guardian ad litems would sort of play hide the ball, and you'd only find out what they're thinking when you're in front of the judge, and you don't really have time to react with your client when they do it that way. I want to be the change I want to see in the legal community.
So,
So I tell these attorneys, this is what I'm
and
thinking.
what would that be?
I tell the attorneys, this is what I'm thinking. Um, your mom client is not going to get 75% of the time. I'm not seeing it that way. They were doing 50-50 before they filed for 30 months. Why should I change it now just because they paid you and they want that? What in the best interest standard says I got to give her 75%? So I think
So does that
my
make you different than most um, ad litem?
yeah, the most guardian ad litems, I don't know about most, but I'm definitely different in that regard. But I base it in the facts. I base it in the facts and I base it on the law. I don't do it on a bias. When I do my decisions and
Hmm.
recommendations for the court aim, I want to do it as if it's parent A and parent B. And I don't see their
Right.
gender. I want to be non-gender based guardian ad litem, and so I've seen some horrific crimes that mothers have done. I've seen some horrific crimes that fathers have done. And I have been around cases much later, but one of the cases that still haunts me to this day, I represented a father. They did joint parenting back when they called it joint custody. They did that agreement, and then 2 years later, I get a call from him saying my child's mother and her boyfriend just got arrested for killing the youngest child. And that still sticks with me today because we could have gone in, got a simple order of
Yeah.
protection, and protected that child. And there are some horrific fathers, and it's all races, all genders. There's no perfect race, there's no perfect gender. And I've seen kids impacted by all of it. And I want to be a kid centric guardian ad litem that will try to get as much of mom and as much of dad and as much as their families to love on these children the way those children deserve to be loved. They didn't ask to be brought into this world. They are the innocents here. And so we need to protect the innocents. And so I try to take out as much of my own bias as I can. And I believe I do a good job of that.
S- So if my spouse earns way more than me, does that automatically mean more support or is it more complicated than that?
No, it would be more support, depending on the parenting schedule. Even if it's 50-50, there could still of parenting time, there could still be a large amount of child support given to the mother in that situation if the father's making substantially more. So, maintenance and spousal support, back when I started a long time ago, I feel like a dinosaur now, Zane, but Illinois didn't have a codified maintenance, like, statute. Like, you could go to the Daily Center of Chicago where there's 50 plus family law judges, and you can get 45
Hmm.
different values per month for maintenance, before the law changed. Now it's much more algebraic, and, the hardest part sometimes is creating the income numbers to work with because some fathers or some parents are, business owners or self-employed, and then that's hard to quantify how much they're actually making.
So if you're a certified mediator through Northwestern, what um, can you mediate a divorce or is that not something that gets done?
I can absolutely mediate divorce. I am on the approved Kane County mediators list, and on that list, they send a lot of their parenting issues to those mediators on the list. It's not really financial mediation, although I am capable of doing a financial mediation as well. But yeah, Northwestern's mediation program is very active. hands-on, role playing, um, a lot of role playing with, you know, where you get to be, a litigant, where we can make it tough on the mediator and,
Mhm.
um, make their life difficult. And then we're also the mediators and we have our classmates role playing the mediation for us. And so I give the Northwestern Mediation Program is accepted everywhere um, in Illinois counties, and and even in our class, we had a lot of people from out of state. We had California lawyers, Alabama lawyers, had a judge from downstate in our class with us. Just because downstate they don't have as many, they have a quandary where there's not enough lawyers in the rural areas of Illinois, and so some of the judges take on that, like, alternative dispute resolution hat when they're trying to finish cases down in the, rural areas of Illinois. But, yeah, mediation, I love it. I think more people need to do it, even on the financial side, because with a good mediator, because it can save them so much money in litigation, Zane. It could be a matter of a couple thousand versus tens of thousands to litigate similar issues.
So how does it actually mediation actually work for a family law case? And when is it the right move versus going to the court sort of
So when,
pursuit?
yeah, when is it the right move? I would say when you have two people that can manage their emotion. Sometimes mediation gets hot and heavy. Sometimes mediation can have people start to try and yell at each other. When I see that as a mediator, if I'm in person, I'll calm it down. If I'm on Zoom, I'll quiet a mic and I'll start, I'll say, hey, I've just quieted your mics. We need to be respectful here. We're working toward the goal. We're not trying to go home from the outset. And so, one of the things um, that I would say is it has to be the right temperament by the parties to do mediation successfully. And then we would want to know, that they
So I got to interrupt you just for a second because your mic volume seems like it's dropped a little bit.
okay. Okay, no problem. I'll try to speak
There, that's
closer.
better.
And so one of the things I think about mediation, Zane, is people got to be ready for it, because they say in court, even when you're litigating it and you do a pretrial conference, the judge knows he did a good job when both sides are not happy. You know, that's a saying at the courthouse. I know I did a good job because nobody's happy here. I've heard judges say that my whole career. And in mediation, there's no judge to make you unhappy, you know, but that's both parties to come to consensus. Can you live with this? Now, you're not going to get the apology letter on the front page of the Tribune, but can you live with this? Can they live with this? Can you get to consensus? Is it fair enough? Is it fair enough? It doesn't have to, be a zero sum game. Mediation is not about that. Mediation is about consensus. Is it fair enough? Do we want to give these a-hole lawyers the rest of our retirement? Because only the lawyers win in a battle. These parties don't win.
Right.
These parties don't win. We would rather, in my firm, we would rather settle. You know, we're not afraid of trial. You have to know how to do trial to avoid a bad settlement. Because some lawyers will take advantage of you if you're afraid of trial. It's sort of like, I don't know if you remember the movie The Karate Kid, but why do we train to fight? So we don't have to fight, you know? And so trial is that fight that you don't want to get to, but we will if we have to. We will dance. We know how to. And that's going to be, I mean, trial is going to add like 20,000 plus to the bill. So on each side,
Right.
on each side. So You know, we
So
would settle.
what's the most common mistake that parents make that actually hurts their case without them realizing it?
I would say the social media addiction. You know, people have to put everything on social media. People have to put their, their parties and alcohol bottles. If you see a picture of an alcohol bottle on a table, we don't know if you had one shot or 10 shots. A picture says 1,000 words, yeah, and so can false allegations. So just the risk of social media, angry, doing the passive aggressive posts where we know they're talking about the other spouse or partner. Um, and then with children, um, could be posting the children. Um, but I think it's that social media, and then, just some people don't want to take accountability in a family court setting. And so if we, some people, if they've done something wrong, like, let's say they have a little bit of an alcohol issue. Instead of raising their voice and trying to yell that I don't have an issue, they could succumb to like a breathalyzer device and something like SoberLink to show that they don't have that alcohol issue. Because now they've been seen on social media. Now people think they're, addicted to alcohol or, drinking all the time nonstop. That picture of an alcohol bottle doesn't have a time, place, date. They don't know if it was a birthday of a family member or is this every night. And so, you have to really think about the context and how somebody that hates your guts can spin it negatively against you. So people have to be careful about that. They
So
may not be.
when parents use when parents use kids as leverage or even as messengers, sometimes a parent can get vindictive, and it may be your client, it may be the other parent, or maybe it both. How do you coach them um, through that where they're so emotionally caught up in the situation that the kids are really victimized? How do you coach somebody through that to try to avoid that situation?
Well, you have to be honest always, and a lot of times in a situation like that, we'll bring up the best interest standards to them. And we'd point to the one that said supporting the relationship of the non custodial parent or the other parent. And we'll warn them, like, if this behavior doesn't change, you put your advantages on the parenting schedule at risk. You could be a parent that has, majority of the time and the other person has every other weekend. But if you continue down that path, you could end up being the parent with every other weekend. And so that has happened. It's unusual, but that comes out to maybe arguments for alienation at that point. So we warn them about the A word. We don't want a guardian ad litem saying alienation about our clients. We warn them about that because alienation is kind of like a cancer in a custody case. And so you could end up
Hmm.
losing the time you have. And if they still don't get it, Zane, I'll write them an email. I don't believe in the arguments you're pushing anymore. You you could hurt yourself and get less. And I'll withdraw from a case if I don't believe in their case anymore. I'm not here just to make a buck. I'm here to make a difference.
Well,
And one of my
so here's
clients.
my other question. Tell me about a case where you fought hard for a parent-child relationship to be restored or to be changed without naming anyone, where it made a long-term difference. So I have a personal stake in this whole situation myself because I was involved in a custody case many
Mhm.
decades ago,
I'm sorry to hear
and
that.
uh, um,
Stressful.
and Well, I actually ended up getting custody, which was pretty unusual, but at the
Hey,
time,
even
so you can
today,
imagine the other side of it. What's that?
even today, it's unusual for the man to get that primary residency. It's still unusual.
So tell me about a situation where you had something that ended up resolving in the favor of the child that you were really, felt like, this is what it's all about.
So I was just thinking about that because I'm friends on Facebook with one of my former clients, and this child just turned 16. But I remember when the child was 3, and the mom wanted to move to North Carolina and take the child with her. And this mom was not going to support a relationship with my client, the father. And my client was also a military service member as well, veteran. And so he wanted the child to just have parenting time in Illinois. And then as the case grew on and on, mom said, "Well, if my daughter's crying, I'm not going to put her on the airplane to go with him." And then, I want him to file and sign the adoption because I want the guy I just met 2 months ago that I'm moving in with. I want him to adopt my daughter. And, the things that she was doing cumulatively led to our guardian ad litem in that case, uh, recommending to me to file for residency. And so I did file for residency under that. And the mom was just at her deposition. She was so anti dad that nothing, the guardian ad litem could tell her was going to encourage her to support the relationship with the father. And over a period of probably 18 months, we were able to come away with residency for the father just short of trial. And we had a psychologist involved, and mom just hated this guy. Her lies about him got more exaggerated. It was a one night stand situation, but then as we moved on to the case, it became a rape allegation. Well, he raped me. And there was never any cry out of rape at the time of the pregnancy, but she was trying to win at all costs, even if it meant calling into uh, the circumstances, criminal law, and possible criminal charges. But nothing was ever brought on him, and that child is 16 now and thriving with dad and his new wife and everything else. So it was, the child's in activities, child's not bouncing around from house to house. It would have been a real, part of the French, Zane, but crap show if mom would have came out with the primary residency on that one. So, and then just even as a guardian ad litem, I rejected claims for relocating. There was a lady who wanted to move in with her boyfriend in Florida, and she met him on the internet, and there was like 3 kids under 5. One of the factors we have to consider is, the relationship with the parent should the relocation be granted. And, moving in with her boyfriend, I imagine that over the next 2 years, those young children are going to be calling the boyfriend dad. And, knowing how children are on the phone, there is no substitute for in-person time with between a father and a young child. And, that phone
Right.
call is not going to suffice and not gonna overcome 24 hours a day that the new boyfriend is around these children. And so I just don't see the relationship managing, um, or surviving just the distance. There could be a severe estrangement that is born from a relocation with a young child. Now, if they were 12 or 13, I'd have to look at it differently, but a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old, they're not gonna be on the phone with this guy, let's be real. So, um, so I take that into consideration. I'm a father myself. My daughter's about to turn 8 in a couple weeks, and I remember I even now calling her on the way home, she's on there for 5 minutes, and then she's off running, doing her own thing. So,
Yeah.
I, I don't believe a parent-child relationship can last to the degree that it can if they were here and the father was active. So that's one of the reasons too why I got in here. My dad was very hands off, my siblings and I, and my mom would have let him take us whenever he wanted. He just didn't want. And you know, I fight for the dads that are here too, and the dads that want to be involved. I mean, these children's histories and historical memories that they'll have is forever going to be impacted by dad and mom. I did this with mom. I did this with dad. You
Right.
take one of them away, their childhood is now diminished in my eyes.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. So I think we're going to wind it up right there. So if somebody is in Illinois, Northern Illinois, and they need help, do you specialize in dads or do you both
We
moms
are
and dads?
moms and dads. Like I said, we give single moms discounts, um, and we give military members discounts as well. But yeah, we're in Chicagoland, all the collar counties, and we'll take on representation of anybody whose case we believe in.
So if they have any questions, somebody wants to avail themselves of your services, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
So our phone number, we have some great ladies that answer our calls. Our phone number is 847-616-0980, 847-616-0980. And call, you'll either talk with Tony or Dolly. And these ladies, you can hear the smile on their voice. They are very perceptive and receptive to people calling in a tough time. And we're here to help people, Zane. We're here to help. Um, we some of us are fathers in the office as attorneys, and you know we have a good strong lot of young attorneys as well. And this fall we'll have two more. Lord willing, they pass the bar exam, but that would push us to seven attorneys under our office with the up counsel with us as well. So we're growing. A lot of judges have complimented us on our growth, and they're very complimentary. They've seen me for a long time, and now they're starting to see my young staff with them as well.
Well, Janae, thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
It is my pleasure, Zane. My pleasure. Salutations to all your listeners and your watchers, and just hope this can educate some people about how Illinois works.
Thanks.